spend a lot of time talking to teenagers on social media. I'm watching young people who are drifting back into an older style of social media. They're focused on this myth making, creating fandoms. They're not interested in monetization. I wonder if you feel like there's a trend line that's going to be interrupted soon.
Well, I mean, I guess I know we kind of encounter different worlds on the internet, and you're much more in maybe a darker world. But it's interesting the way you're talking about monetization, because I do think, especially with millennial internet, there's this explicit monetization and very girl boss kind of stuff where
Totally.
it's very capitalistic. But a lot of young people I speak to, at least, have also just an understanding of the value of online influence and clout, I guess, and not necessarily needing to directly monetize it right away, juice the, whatever money you're going to get out of it. But it's also, I think, when you're 18 or younger too, you don't have those financial pressures always. You're not your goal isn't always to monetize everything. It's more to build a narrative or explore in different ways or build your brand. And then obviously money comes later, but there's almost more value in social clout at that age, or clout within your community.
Yeah, it's you have to build very durable fandoms now. I'm looking at conversion rates. This is the metric. This is what I'm most interested in recently, is that there's audiences that are enormous and then their views to monetization is really tiny. And that signals a low level of trust in the content creator. It means that the things this person is saying are not very impactful. They don't affect the way I view the world.
It kind of reminds me of community building, back when the first wave of social, there was this thing called the community managers meetup. This was before you could really things would go viral, but it was always one off and it was all about the communities, right? The first social media.
Is this Facebook era or?
This was it was right after Facebook launched Pages. I would say 2010, 2011, early Twitter, early Tumblr, but it was before you had social media strategists, you had these community managers that was who are fans of us and how do we find these people on the internet? It was a lot about blogs too, finding these little fandoms around certain writers or bloggers. I think social media, the Web 2 sort of social media, is not really built for that. It's all based on scale and reach and stuff. And I do think we're getting back into that communities era. I feel like you and I spend a lot of time on Discord, and there's just very strong Discord communities, and people are realizing that you don't need scale all the time. It's all about sort of building this group that's very dedicated.
Yeah, well, that's okay. So I think that part of it is generational. Part of it is also just the arc of the internet and content production and brand building. You and I are both millennials, and to some degree, we're early adopters of social media. You more so than I, of your early stuff on Tumblr. But we were able to build careers later in life because we had the benefit of being there early. But now, if you're just getting onto social media, you have 100 followers of your friends versus these multi-million accounts. So I feel like people are opting out of that creative entrepreneur, personal brand, millennial strategy and are opting into these dark forest private spaces like Discord communities. And I see it in the Zoomers that are part of our community, in that they spend less time on Instagram and spend more time in Discord because it's more meaningful to them.
Or even the time they're spending on those. They're forming communities that I think are not accessible to the masses, or they're very self-referential. They're very they're not trying to scale as much as it is identifying this group or your in-group. Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I think TikTok has been the most disruptive thing but that's because it's not built on that follower model. You're primarily consuming things through an algorithm.
I feel like TikTok is now compulsory for the big content creators. They have to have a presence on it.
It's the best. It's the only sort of white space on the internet where because it's not, the distribution is not built on following and followers. It's a place that you can go, you're talking about, that's not totally saturated. It is way more saturated now than even a year ago, but still it's so good at delivering you things that are relevant in these niche areas. And so it reminds me so much of Tumblr, where there are these communities and these aesthetics that form out of there, are these subgroups.
Yeah, I was thinking about Tumblr specifically, and there was an era of, I think this is maybe less the case on TikTok now, but in the early years, there was Tumblr had these collisions of hashtags where things would combine that were very unpredictable, but then synthesized a new aesthetic language that was really exciting. And TikTok had like flashes of that or inklings of that. I don't know. I don't spend too much time there anymore. I feel like
You got to get on there, Josh.
I was. It broke my heart. Yeah. I had such like high hopes for what TikTok could be. What I found was that in the course of the research that I'm really interested in is that TikTok didn't have the same infrastructure of like group DMs.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids, like we're talking about opting into Discord or private spaces or stuff like that. If you're under the age of 18 and you maybe don't have a payment system set up and you can't get into a paywalled community, what they do is they make private group DMs on Instagram, and then that's their Discord. And it's like 30 people and they just chat all day. And like that's kind of their news feed rather than the actual like feed on Instagram.
I think like we're all moving that way. I mean, I just wrote a piece like a couple years ago on group chats and related to that. And I just think that like obviously private communities, like that's why Twitter is building that communities feature, right? That we have now. It's not the same as a group DM, but I think, I mean, one thing I see a lot on TikTok though is like making a DM group about X, like if you want to be in it, comment, or like making a Snap group about whatever. People will say like, join my Discord around this, or like, if you're into this stuff, I'll put you in a group chat.
I was trying to theorize of like, what is the carrying capacity of like how many people you can actually have in a community? Because I feel like there's an equilibrium where it's like, oh, this is really good at like 50 people. And then once it gets like 150, it's
I think all that is
much.
too big. I think 50 people is too much for a group chat. Anytime you have too many lurkers, like I don't like that. I'm like, you got to be a contributor. But I think like just the single chronological like feed of a group chat gets untenable if you have too many people posting. So I think Discord is good because it like breaks it up, you know, like you can have like the topics and stuff like that. I mean, Discord is obviously like the best social network for that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fallback for all of this is the group text. I have a group text that is, let's say like 6 people. It's kind of like the writer's room for all of these like art, social media ideas, and everyone like checks in with each other and like workshops an idea. I don't know if that is necessarily possible to rebuild on the larger scale. I do think though that there's a sharing of creative labor that can happen in these smaller communities, especially through like collaborative meme building. And that happens like that is organized through the group DM of like smaller communities.
I mean, I feel like you have to start stuff that way. That's the only way to a good way to get stuff going, right? I mean, influencers do that with pods, right? And I think memers do it with memes. And I mean, I definitely have that with other writers where we all promote each other's work and like talk about ideas and stuff for stories. And I think like you're talking about just the value, that chat that you're in, that's sort of like other people that are your peers. Like it's so important to have that. Like it's just really helpful to have people to like bounce ideas off of, or like.
This is the interesting thing though also, and I think it's on a similar trend line where like, so say for example, all of those people who are in this group chat have their own Substack or Patreon or some other thing that like they're monetized, and we're all kind of atomized islands in this thing. Based on the monetization scheme right now, there's disincentives to really work with each other, in that I'm not sure how we could equitably split the profits for any of the stuff that we publish, right? So if someone is on Substack and I'm on Patreon, obviously that's a conflict. But for some reason, there's also not a way, if like 2 people are on Patreon or 2 people are on Substack, people kind of build in these improvised schemes of like, oh, this is someone publishing on my platform, and this is like someone publishing on the other platform. But it seems almost intuitive that there should be something built in through the network that facilitates collaboration. And for whatever reason, there's not.
Crypto people will tell you that blockchain solves this.
They do. And it does a little bit. It actually kind of does. But I wonder, well, maybe that is the trend line. The trend line is actually something is going to tip into Web3 publishing, and that will then be like the new way of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I have friends that have gotten into like newsletter groups, or you're talking about like do swaps and stuff. It's always a hard thing to divvy up. If you have your own little thing going independently too, like you don't always want to collaborate in a business sense with other people. Yeah, it is a shame that there's not easier ways for these. Like, I feel like all these platforms just don't want anything to do with the other platforms. You know, it's not easy to work across the internet in that way.
That makes a lot of sense. So I feel like we spent the last 6 months on the Twitch stream talking about the importance of institutions and the role that they play in society. And now I have I've left my teaching jobs at universities and I'm becoming a content producer full time. So like kind of all of the things that I said, like, this is what you should not do. And that that's where we are now.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to do it. I think specifically in the art world, media is probably more resilient to this, but in the art world, there's really no competition. There's no alternative for if you're like a creative producer and for whatever reason, the mainstream institutions are not interested in your work. There's nowhere else to go. Now there's platforms. So I think a little bit of competition is healthy for the art world. But what I'm worried about is that I'm worried that we're going to lose expertise and we're going to lose narratives that are not subject to the competitive laws of the attention economy, that we're going to lose curation, we're going to lose editors, and we're going to have like a race to the bottom of like clickbait and like sensational porn, basically. I wonder if there is some kind of potential in these dark forest spaces, in these private spaces, where you can escape the attention economy momentarily.
I mean, I think on the internet, you have to either it's very similar to media, right? Like, I mean, I don't know as much about the art world, but that's what everything you're saying is exactly true for the media world.
There's a parody of just institutional structures versus platforms. Yeah.
But I think you're either chasing scale or you're chasing like subscriptions in like a small community, right? And I think like most of the 2010s was about scale, and now we're like getting towards that like community building and like small sort of like fans or these like really engaged, like you're talking about, like groups that are not public. That's, I think, just mentally a better way to operate on the internet. I think if you're chasing scale on the internet, it's just miserable, right? And thankless. And like you're talking about platform capitalism, like that's what they incentivize you to do, right? And so you really have to kind of fight against that because that's everything on the internet is pushing you towards trying to optimize for that. And you have to be intentional and kind of be like, no, this is how I'm going to grow my influence, like in this very strategic way, and also like monetize in ways that are conducive to that. If you're monetizing via ads and stuff that are incentivizing scale, like that's not going to help you build a small community. If you're doing like a Discord or you have a Patreon and like things like that, I think it's easier to build a business or build make a living like without having to reach the masses.
The scale problem is, I think a lot of the conversations of the last few years are basically problems of scale of like, I wonder if we have a healthier political discourse and just like a healthier society in general, if there are spaces that are not subject to the, I don't want to say surveillance, that's not the right term, but like spaces that are private, that are not visible to a mass audience of people who want to like come in and snip things out of context and stuff like that. This is kind of a roundabout argument for gatekeeping. But what the platforms promised was getting rid of the corrupt gatekeepers. But what they meant by that was that they were going to fire all of the editors, and they were only going to have the incentives of driving clicks to sell ad views as like, that is going to be your editorial optimization. Those are your goals. It doesn't matter the human narratives that you want to tell. You have to drive X 100,000 clicks to this article in the most sensational, inflammatory way possible. And that has shredded society and the national discourse to a maybe irreparable degree now. So I think this is a healthy process in this next stage of social media.
I think it's also, but it's about accessibility and openness too. I will say the one thing that the platforms offer is accessibility and sort of being able to very easily like encounter new views or things like, I mean, I'm just thinking of Twitter, for instance. Like, I do think that the communities tab is like a good tab, which is now like sort of essentially private groups within Twitter, but they're not like super private. And I think like that's the problem. Like if there is a problem with Discord, I think discovery is a problem where like it's just you're almost too, you don't want to push everyone too into closed communities like Facebook groups, right? Like it's just very like then you're just in this insular world where you're only surrounded by other people that are nuts, you know? And so there is something
They're cults. Yeah, they can be cults very quickly. Yeah.
And so that openness and discovery I think is really important to like, you know, functioning society.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There has to be some level of like visibility because otherwise closed groups create dogmas that are totally uninterrogated. And in a political context, this means that people marinate in really bad, sometimes very dangerous ideas, and they radicalize further and further in this contained echo chamber, right? So having like a little bit of light leak, to take the phrase from Carly Busta from the New Models podcast, the dark forest should not be self-contained. Like there has to be some level of visibility from the mainstream platforms. That kind of discourse is really important. And that means, I was trying to describe this recently as like one of the, I'm talking about art institutions, but maybe there's an analogy here for media. The institutions erect certain dogmas. They're subject to elite capture as they become more and more exclusive. So I think that as the cost of living gets higher, there's a pruning mechanism for people who can enter institutions. So let's say the starting salary at a museum in New York City is like $35,000. Nobody can really afford to do that. So the people who get those entry-level jobs are increasingly subsidized by intergenerational wealth, which then prunes away certain narratives. And before you know it, you have a museum that basically upholds the interests of like a very narrow slice of society.
Like media. Yeah, it's the same. I mean, I think it's the same in media. At least when I was trying to come up in media, like it's everything you just said is true for a lot of legacy media institutions. Obviously, a lot of places are trying to diversify and realizing like, you know, we should pay people for their internships now, like unpaid internships.
Those were normal. Like when, yeah.
They were totally normal. I had to work retail on top of my job and work food service just to do my free internships all day. I'm like, what the fuck? Like
you had to work two jobs to pay for your free internship.
To go work for free 9 to 5 on all my internships. I did 9 internships too.
That's like the early industrial revolution. Like 16-hour days are normal.
Yeah.
That's kind of normal now too.
It's
also.
normal now. It's just on the internet.
Like, we've actually gone backwards. That's the yeah.
I mean, we've never fixed any problems with labor really in our lifetime. I mean, we've seen.
It's only been getting.
It's only been sort of like further and further dismantled, like in terms of like labor protections and labor rights. I mean, it's great that a lot of legacy media places like pay their interns now, but that's not gonna solve. That's not the solution for everything.
Yeah. I mean, well.
The art world is even crazier. I'm sure it's probably equally crazy.
Totally bonkers. Yeah.
I did a year in art school, and everyone that I
was going to ask about that. Because I heard you say it. Wait, this morning actually. But I had never heard you say that you went to art school before.
Oh my god, I was so into art. I won my town like art fair thing for a while. I was like,
wow. Okay, this is news. I didn't know about that.
Oh my god, I have so much of my.
What did you do?
Artwork is at my parents' house, which has been hopefully thrown away. I was a painter. I was really into that, and speaking of millennials, like, you know, when I was in high school in the early 2000s, like the art stuff, I remember all I wanted to do was go to RISD. That was like my dream. And I was like, I'm going to go to RISD and I'm going to be an artist and this is going to be my path. And you had to have this, you had to be really adept at like fine art in a way that I hate. Like you had to be like a good painter and you had to paint these stupid still lifes and that had to go in your portfolio. And one time I was in Boston and there was some sort of like portfolio review from some like, you know, art person and they were critiquing all of our shit. And I just was like, this sucks. I'm creative. I know I'm creative. Why do I have to like do some blind drawing to like tell you that like, I feel like I'm in the 1800s. And now like, I don't know, like that's kind of why I got out of it. I just was like, this system sucks. And then I realized too that like you get paid nothing. Like I always thought,
oh yeah.
I just remember I would email, you know, random people and I emailed some gallery for an internship in New York that I think I just found. And they were like, yeah, it's unpaid. And then I ended up getting coffee with the girl. And I think she said she made $22,000 a year.
That would have been like
It's
2005
like
or
2004.
something?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
That's
I
like
was in
3 financial crashes ago. So it's like the money is
well,
different.
ironically got into fashion instead
Yeah.
and did all these fashion internships and was working in fashion.
Also very expensive.
Which is like also just everyone else there was like just the kids of rich, like,
Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah.
So I think any creative field, art, media, fashion, like these are all like, they all are upholding a certain like institutional power and this like class system. It's not a meritocracy.
Right. So that's the terrible thing, is that we're stuck between these two worlds, and there's the old, like, say, for lack of a better term, like aristocracy, like an American aristocracy of nepotism and like intergenerational institutional connections, like who your dad knows, right? That type of shit. But then there's this other thing of like this rival force, which is the Silicon Valley platforms that are opening up possibilities to break into certain creative fields, but then bring with them terrible incentive structures and maybe produce things that are sometimes of a, dare I say, a lower quality and a lower significance than like the great works of the past. We're all kind of shredded between these two different worlds right now. So this is kind of my pitch, because there's a bunch of people who are like, let's say, like 21 years old, who are in the Discord, and they are opting out of higher education to like spend time in this community, pay $5 to hear like literally the same syllabus that you would get in a $50,000 semester school. Markets are going to do their thing. Like if the accredited degree is no longer useful, people will opt out of it. But my pitch to them is that there's not going to be really enough creative sector jobs to support all of them, and that the world that we would like to see, we're talking a lot about monetization and influence and content production here, but the world that we would like to see is something more like, say, the 1970s, where there was relatively more of a social safety net, there were better wages, there were better protections for labor, and that they could navigate their creative practice in a decommodified way. That they could, if they could sell their paintings, that's great, but they don't have to sell their paintings to survive, because they can wait tables 3 days a week, and they can pay rent, and they can pay for a studio and art materials, and like they can live this life that in a very wealthy, productive society we should be able to have, and not necessarily need to optimize their creative talents and their creative labor towards selling a commodity that they have to survive off of. Like, if I don't sell 4 paintings this month, I can't pay my rent. That kind of situation.
I know, it's making, I mean, this is how I think with media too, right? Like you used to just have like this system, this like very like elite sort of system that was very like hard to access, and it was sort of like up there in a bubble, and then there was sort of like nothing in between. And obviously the internet has allowed for all of this stuff in between, and all of these levels of success or levels of expression or like levels of monetization. I think the internet has different rewards. I mean, so you're not worried about some gallery, but you are worried about the followers or the whatever. Like there's always some, you're putting stuff in the world to be judged, and any creative thing, like you are sort of trying to generate an audience, but it is sad that people can't, like you're talking about, that you have to like monetize yourself like that. I wish that there was other jobs and that there was more worker protections and like things where you could just, you could just do your work and go home. You can't always.
Oh, that would be nice.
Do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think so. So you and I we're tied to the deck. Like we're going down with the ship. Like there's probably not within like our career arcs is it possible to resolve these things. But maybe if you're like 15 years old right now, you're actually we're between the two worlds, but they're going to be in one rather than the other. And so
I hope
maybe
they're in a
there's
better world and not a more dystopian world.
I hope so. I mean, like, so I've been in these art tech reading groups in New York for many, many years. And I feel like way back in the day, like the worst case scenarios that we would extrapolate, like, look at this like tech pitch, look at this rhetoric. Is this just like fucking scorched earth libertarianism? Like these people are insane. They're going to reinvent like child labor and shit. And it's like, actually, it is that. Like that's what they created.
That's the promise.
That's
look at
actually...
what Instagram for kids was supposed to be. I mean, Yeah, it is that. I mean, it's insane. I mean, I've written so much about sort of labor protections for children and these teen influencers. And like, I mean, so many kids are just getting exploited on the internet every day by like people looking to make money off them or sort of using them. They're working all the time. It's like, that's depressing to me. I do think like there's so many teenagers now participating in the adult economy in a way that like, you know, when we grew up, like there was that separation, like to talk to a business like person was like, wow, like, well, I'm in the kid world and there's this adult world. And now all the kids are just on the adult internet and it sucks for them. That sucks.
Yeah, I remember when I first, like the very first thing I published on this stuff, people literally did not believe that the kids I was describing and talking to were that young. And it wasn't until TikTok that I could just hold up the phone and say like, look, this is the person in their bedroom. This is how young they are. But before, I felt like the resistance to that was, but it was this sense of like, oh, it can't possibly be that bad on the platforms. Like this can't be happening to kids that young. And 13 years old and being an anti-SJW is a very appealing identity to a kid who feels marginalized at school and at home.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all of that like radicalized stuff is like catnip for children that age because it speaks to everything that they're going, like that's such a hard time in life and you're determining your own identity. And especially if you're a young boy, I think like you can go down that rabbit hole pretty easily. Yeah. I have a lot of teenage cousins, and thankfully none of them have fallen down that, but they definitely have gone through different stages online.
They're probably aware of it. If they're not in
100%.
it, they're just like,
or they're getting the
there.
PragerU videos on YouTube constantly.
One of these kids his parents didn't allow him to have social media.
Uh-huh.
He spent 2 years in the comment threads of PragerU videos.
Oh, no.
That was like, and he was owning the libs the whole time.
Okay.
And like, I mean, but this kid who's literally 13 and 14, and then he had a sibling who really cared about him, age 15 and 16, he gets out of it. But I don't know, I feel like a stodgy conservative that there should be some very tight regulations to protect the children who are on these platforms because it's clearly having terrible effects in society.
I totally agree. I think the platforms will never do anything, and I think that lawmakers like can barely turn on a computer, so we'll never be able to successfully legislate around it. And I don't know what's gonna fix it. I mean, I will say also like there's so much toxic stuff about the internet. A lot of I always talk to the parents of kids that I interview usually, and like some of the parents are nuts too, you know.
That's the other thing. Yeah. Well, I was talking to this one. I won't use their name, but they got radicalized and some more so on the left than the right specifically. But I had an interaction, very rare one, where I was talking to the mother, and the mother is like a fanatical evangelical Christian. And I was like, okay, this kid, despite all of the radical ideas, might be more in touch with reality than the home life. Yeah. And that's no longer an internet problem. That's a political problem, a social problem, a media problem. But I feel like, I spent a lot of time online growing up. Despite all of the weird and traumatic stuff that I saw, it was definitely better than what's happening now.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the internet was just arguably a healthier place. Like in some ways, obviously there's just as much toxic shit, but like it was a better landscape. It was.
I remember like really shocking,
I'm not trying to be
gross
nostalgic
things.
about it.
There's like seeing something gross is different than like being indoctrinated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And indoctrination is what's happening, and obviously not just to children. I was actually blocked this girl that I interned with years ago, and she's gone full QAnon and everything. And
oh wow,
yeah,
what's her age?
She's in her 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, we interned together, and like I've seen her go down this rabbit hole for a while, and tried to like communicate with her, and she's just gone batshit and basically was like, you're a journalist, you deserve rape threats and harassment and all this. I'm like, we
Jesus
fucking
Christ.
had a media internship together like 12 years ago. Like what? And I was looking back through our, right before I blocked her, I looked back through our Instagram DMs, and it was so weird. It's like, it just was so like, we were talking really nice and normal, and then she something happened with the pandemic because she was posting about Save the Children. Yes. I think this past year has radicalized a lot of people.
I've been saying this, that the pandemic was an incubation period for people who are already on the borderline stuff.
Yes.
And then content consumption goes way up, social atomization goes way up, economic precarity spikes, and those are all the contributing factors. And like, well, people who are on the borderline are now radicalized. And so there was a lot of talk of like, oh, we solved social media, like fake news is done and extremism online is done. And it's like, no, it's like we're just getting started.
We're
like
just
the last
getting
year.
started.
So...
Okay, anyone that says that needs to like log on for one day. It's terrifying.
Can I ask you about? Okay, I'm not going to tip my hand for this because I have my own thoughts on it, but I get this question a lot. People ask me about Gen Z and QAnon. They say something like, "Oh, all these crazy Zoomers are like really into the QAnon stuff."
I wouldn't say they're into the QAnon stuff, but I do think that there's a. I'm just thinking of like the Wayfair, like TikTok,
the cabinets,
yeah,
the child trafficking,
yeah. But people, I mean, I talked to teenagers and their parents about that, and I was like, God, like this is just not real. But they do believe it. I think it depends on the kids' media literacy. I think overall, like, a lot of people make fun of those type of like boomer people online, or like are doing it ironically or like kind of joking, or they know it's a conspiracy, but they're feeding into it. At the same time, a lot of like 12 and 13-year-olds 100% believe it because their primary source of information is the internet. And it's very easy to see things on the internet that make you like, there's no media literacy among young people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of
that's interesting.
What do you think?
So I cite this one poll from one of these guys I've been following who's like, now very, very on the right. And before he was like maybe, the kind of good-natured libertarians, the ones that like smoking pot and like gay people and like the friendly libertarians. Yeah. He was one of those. And now he's definitely not. But he had this Instagram story. There was a poll. If you know someone our age, meaning Gen Z, that believes in QAnon, and it was like 80% no, 20% yes. But I feel like there's a conflation of virality and fake news and this impulse to attribute that to like the younger generation of like, oh yeah, it's these crazy kids on the internet.
No, I mean, I think QAnon is driven by like Fox News type stuff.
It's boomer stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I actually don't think a lot of kids, at least the ones that I've ever talked to, would sort of like identify with QAnon by name as a cause. But if you're asking them, do you think like elites control whatever? Like, yes, they do. Yes. And also part of that's being a teenager.
Well, that part is also true.
But that's
like,
what I mean.
Elite control.
Well, right. But I'm talking more about like the sex trafficking or the whatever,
right,
or is the media
international satanic pedophiles.
Yeah.
Or,
like,
yes.
I mean, I do think that a lot of people, if you start asking them those questions, like are a lot more amenable or believe in it, because it's like all of these conspiracies, right? They take a kernel of truth, which is that, yes, there is this, billionaire class that operates with impunity in society. But it's like, yes, that's true, but that doesn't make this other part of it true. But they're using that sort of like true part of it as evidence of the other part. And you're like, but that other part's not true.
Yeah.
But you can see, I mean, yeah, it is, I think like the QAnon by name is more like the boomer internet, like the Facebook or... Right.
But I feel like there's something here that is an indication of the story or the hopes of the internet going wrong, in that, as millennials, I feel like people a few years older than us would say like, oh, the kids today are like, they're so internet literate. They're digital natives. They know these things intuitively. They're going to have this ingrained ability to navigate social media in such a way that they would be immune to false narratives.
No.
And that's not happening.
Not true.
No, it's actually kind of going the other way.
100% believe things.
Yeah.
I had to talk a teenager explaining that 9/11 was real. Like, I mean, he would not have it. But
he inside job, or he thought it didn't happen?
No, he just thought it didn't happen.
Oh, well.
I was like, it happened.
No, that's great.
But it's like, okay, I don't know. It just didn't. I'm like, well, what strain of, I don't know, trutherism is this? But I don't know. I mean, it's like people are very much in their worlds, and they do go to these like influencer type figures online for information now. Right. They're much more likely to get their information from that. And they're much more likely to be like sort of distrustful of the mainstream media.
This is kind of the thing. And this is not, I'm not talking specifically about legacy media here. I'm talking about institutions in general. But like we've been in a 40-year period where the faucet of funding for all of America's institutions has been cranked down for 40 years in a row. I feel like people are flowing into the influencer communities because all of those things are failing. So there's this kind of domino effect. And then people go out onto the web in search of answers. And then they find someone who's like, okay, I hear your frustration and your anger, and let me give you a solution for it. And I'm inclined to be sympathetic to some of those people because it's so frustrating to actually to affect the problem in any other facet, because all of the institutions are collapsed and the political infrastructure is not functioning either.
I feel like, every year I like become more of a nihilist about everything because it's just like
That's
so
a bad period
depressing. I'm like, wow, things are just going to get worse. I have no faith in literally anything. But I can't imagine, like, at least we had this period when we were young too. Like, I'm watching American Crime Story on the Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, wow.
It's so good. Everyone should watch it. But it's just like so funny to think about the 90s, and like the 90s was just this like idea of like corporate America and like buying into the system, and like we grew up in such a different time, whereas now I can't imagine being young and like having faith in a lot, because everything seems to be broken in a lot of ways. And also I think for the good part of the internet is it's exposed a lot of that inequality and fucked up stuff in the system. Like the 90s was obviously even more fucked up than now in a lot of ways. It's just that there was no, like, people didn't have a voice.
Yeah. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's also something of, I feel like post 2008. So like, this is the experience of our generation, where if you were on board with the Tina thesis, or like the neoliberal project of like, okay, in the broad historical arc, like other ideologies and political economies have been invalidated. This is the only system that works. We're just going to continue that out and extrapolate it forever, and we have utopia. But now we're in like multiple financial collapses later, where the system is just very clearly not working. And so I feel like that end of history thesis, the Gen Z, the thing that radicalizes them, like the energy behind it, the thrust of this thing, is that they see themselves as like being on the receiving end of not having had other solutions. So it's like, we're like playful nihilists, but they're like really nihilists.
I mean,
like,
why wouldn't you? I can understand them being like that. That's how I would be too, in some ways. Obviously, hopefully not getting sucked into some bad idea, but it's like the deck is like so stacked against them. But there's also like, not to interrupt, but like there's also like a lot of them, and it's so broad, obviously there's so many teenagers. A lot of ones that I write about, like if I'm writing about somebody, they're usually famous on the internet, and it's just very much like, let me get mine. Like I do feel like we're in this period actually that reminds me so much of right before the financial crisis, where it's like about consumerism, like luxury goods, like, you know, all the like labels are back. Like everyone wants to wear like Gucci shit, like the label in this way that like was very uncool after the financial crisis. And I think like people were reevaluating things, and now I feel like it's just like kind of like YOLO, like whatever. I'm just gonna like, you know, scam someone on this crypto thing and buy a Gucci hat or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, when things feel hopeless, people are like, well, I'm just going to take care of me. I'm going to build the life raft and like, shove off from the sinking ship for sure. Yeah. Can I ask you about, I'm going to shift us into another topic, if that's okay. I'm curious about this because I have talked to meme accounts and various people who report on these topics, and I've never gotten a concise answer because I think it's totally hidden. Okay. It may be folklore. Who knows? Shadowbanning is, I believe, a real thing. I have my own case study of what happened. I compared it with Brad. One is tempted to believe that there was a level of deboosting or deprioritization that happened to both the accounts, and that they lost 99% of their reach for like a period of 60 days. Like seems pretty cut and dry.
No, I mean, it's a thing.
But I wonder, have you heard any like concrete? Like I feel like everything is just ethereal and rumors.
Well, people don't. I didn't even realize I wrote an article in 2017. It was about shadow banning, right when that term sort of first emerged. But I mean, I have a bunch of accounts, and it's not, I think people think of it as a switch, or there's some kind of person that can manually like blacklist you, right?
That's how
or, like,
I imagine it. Yeah.
It's not. I think it's all algorithmic bullshit. And it's like, did you post something that flagged some filter in some code base that is going to now diminish you on this? Or is there some kind of change? I mean, I used to run social media for a bunch of big media companies and brands. And there's always these conspiracies with the Facebook algorithm because, you post the wrong thing, or there was this conspiracy where like if you posted which I think actually could be true, because I did see that Facebook now recently, my colleague reported that they're boosting positive news about Facebook in the Facebook feed. Did you see that?
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine.
But it's so, I mean, it's such concrete proof of like, there was this thing, a weird thing when you posted about Snapchat for a while, when that time when they were hyper competitive and, Evan Spiegel had like rebuffed Zuckerberg's acquisition. There was this time where like, if you as a news company posted about Snapchat, your reach would like dip on that link. And like, I do think that there's things like that are probably some executive was like, we need to do more of this in the feed, or we need to do this. But I don't think it's like as cut and dry as like we're putting this person on a ban for 60 days. I think it's like an algorithm does that. Or you got flagged enough. Or you're on some list. Like obviously they know that they have white lists for celebrities, and like I mean that's been reported too. Like
I saw that recently.
If you're a protected account, if you're a journalist account, if you're something, like there's this higher bar. And if you're not one of those, like too bad for you, because eventually you'll get caught up in something.
One of the examples I always give for this is that I was able to show in the New Museum Theater the images that got me banned from Instagram. And that's a perfect example of like the affordances and the privileges that institutions give you.
It is kind of crazy. I have so many Instagram accounts, but I did have one that I was using to follow only the conspiracy people or whatever. And then it was hard. People were not thinking I was a real account. So I posted a bunch of images of like chemtrails stuff, like just pictures of the sky, not posting anything, not saying like obviously I'm a reporter. I'm not like saying stuff, but I was just using it to lurk, and I got locked out twice. I think it thought I was like a spam account, or somebody had reported me for following. I don't know. It was so weird. And I just used it for lurking, but I do think I kicked some filter up somewhere. I don't know, just by like maybe resharing something that I was. But I don't know. It's all such a black box. I mean, I got locked out of my like Finsta account years ago, and I've never been able to get it back because I have to go through, it's not my main journalist account. So I have to like go through the actual process of trying to retrieve it. And it's impossible. It's like the platform has no support for like average people. And so I understand why these conspiracies come about, because it is very easy to get penalized or shadow banned or whatever. I just think shadow ban is a umbrella term that can mean so many different things.
It means so many different things. That's and most meme accounts that I talk to, they say something like, well, I'm just not getting as many likes as I should. Like, well, maybe your content doesn't. There's a great example from like I have a friend who's in like the noise music scene in Toronto, and their stuff was just not really doing well on Facebook. So they all coordinated together to make their show announcements appear as if they were like a wedding announcement.
Oh, I did that. Yes, for a while we were doing that on Facebook, putting baby marriage in everything.
Baby marriage. Oh, the two. Okay,
yeah.
That makes sense.
But even when we were doing share copy on Facebook for when I was running social accounts, there were all those types of tricks and things like to get reach, because you're just working against this black box algorithm constantly. And that algorithm's constantly changed. It's not even one algorithm. It's just like, it's very hard to navigate the platform.
And it gets updated all the time. And
the priorities change, and what they want to distribute changes, or suddenly you're getting Reels shit pushed to your feed.
Yeah, right. Okay, I noticed that a lot. Yeah. Well, this is again like a labor question, because like say for example, okay, you would think if you were earning your living through the platforms, there should be like very clearly delineated terms of service, because if your visibility suffers, then it's like getting your wages docked.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And for people, it is very literally that for people that are monetizing off views, It's hard. I'm sympathetic to the platforms in the sense that I think policing any of this stuff is really hard, and you have to be somewhat vague, and it has to be somewhat broad enough to give them liberty to like just shut down like the bad stuff without like tipping their hand too much, where you are telling people essentially how to get around it. But then there's, I don't know, with the whole moderation thing, I go back and forth so much. It really depends on the day. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? Everything should just be community moderated. Like, these platforms should have no power. And then sometimes I'm like, why don't they ban all of this spam or like crazy people? This is crazy. I mean, I don't know the answer, and I don't even support. I know everybody thinks, well, I think conservatives love to say, oh, the journalists want you to be banned from everything. I definitely don't. I mean, I think especially as a journalist, you spend your everything is about protecting free speech. And so I don't think any journalist, at least that I associate with, would argue that, but I don't know the solution. It's very...
I feel like shadow banning is an attempt to recreate the internet from a few years ago, where there were like, say there's like a conspiracy community and there's like 100 people who really care about this, but it's not widely spread or anything. Maybe it's good that that message is only heard by a few people. But shadow banning is this like Rube Goldberg machine to try and like create the small pockets of consensus reality on the mainstream platforms. And it is actually an infrastructural problem where if, for example, the platforms were broken up into like a dozen different things, that would be very easy to manage because you wouldn't have the same problem of like a certain post unexpectedly going viral, circulating throughout the web, and whatever. Just the level of visibility between different facets of reality would not mix.
Yeah.
But we're not in that era of the internet anymore. We're not in like 2011 where there's like a Facebook group where it's like, oh, this is such a weird thing to look at. Look at the conspiracy group on Facebook. But now it's pervasive and it's everywhere. And if, for example, there were a dozen different social networks that were actually viable and competing and not like one monolithic thing, that stuff would actually be, I think, pretty significantly suppressed in its reach. I think the best interim solution is these private spaces in the meantime.
Yeah, and
like
people
Discord
relying
groups.
on subscription stuff like Substack, right, where you're working around the algorithms. That's definitely the way things are going. Yeah, Substack is interesting. It's been interesting how it's been like people have tried to politicize it very much. Like it's a startup that like I think is pretty neutral and has pretty totally reasonable like guidelines around like moderation or whatever. Like they definitely think critically about it. But then you see these sort of large right-wing figures just making it like their personality that they're on Substack. And like I kind of feel for the company in the sense that like it's this startup, but the narrative of your company is being seized by these like random people on the platform that are not even the majority of the people on the platform, you know?
So you have a Substack, but
Yes.
you do it relatively infrequently.
I know I'm so bad at publishing.
Well, you're writing a book, so you're I imagine
I'm
busy
just
in the meantime.
lazy. You know what? Also, I have this like anxiety every time I publish on there because it gets emailed to everyone, and even though they subscribe to my Substack, I feel bad. It's like it's the way that like if you post to a feed, it's like whatever, right? But there's something I feel like I'm forcing like a push alert or something in a way that I'm like, I don't know, like is this that important that I need to like alert people? And I need to get over that. But because most people don't even read, you know, they just delete the email. But like, I don't know, it gives me anxiety.
I feel like there's a level of like, it's not like a follow on social media. Like it's like, oh, I do want to see all of these things, right? So you're like opting into it. I think you should just send the email.
I know. I need to get over it. Yeah. I think for Substack, it's best for people that are writing commentary. Like for me, for reporting, like I very much value working on a team and having editors and having like intense scrutiny on my work before it publishes. And that's the other thing that I could not do reporting on Substack. Like I couldn't write an article and put it on Substack and have that be equivalent to the type of reporting that I can produce with the New York Times. Or it would be hard.
Yeah. I feel like that's also part of your meta project is making these online spaces visible to legacy media. And you actually do believe in like legacy media's responsibility to the public and like being aware of these worlds and its ability to report on the world as it actually exists. And this is just quantitatively where most people are looking. So it should be represented. That is, I think, a meritable project because I'm a big fan of functioning institutions. The art world doesn't really have them right now, but I'm hopeful that we'll get them back.
I mean, yeah, that's like the sole goal of my entire career. Like, I mean, I feel like I started my career a little bit out of spite, just being like, I'm going to make these legacy places care about the internet and understand the internet because I hated the way it was covered for so long. And that's what got me into doing it. And it's very hard to do that. But hopefully I make a difference. And hopefully other people that are younger than me that are coming up are going to help make that difference. But yeah, I mean, it's like turning the Titanic, right? Like you're like, and you're just one person and you're like, please, like.
I'm wondering, I literally used that example in a podcast
really?
recently. Yeah. Okay. So
no
this
way.
was the metaphor.
Minds.
I was like, okay. So the Titanic is going to hit the iceberg and I'm on the life raft, and the life raft is Patreon or Substack or whatever. And I'm shouting at the top of my lungs to turn the wheel so that they avoid the iceberg, because I really do believe
I'm on the
in
boat. Like, hey guys.
maybe we could like toss a rope or something to, yeah. That's so funny. I guess it's like,
I think it's like how probably anyone that operates in or sees that world, it's frustrating though. It is an uphill battle. And I say that not about the New York Times, but just like everywhere I've worked at a lot of legacy places. I was at the Atlantic before the Times, and I love my colleagues, but there's this management level in media that is so removed from reality.
Sure.
And it's very hard to get through to them. Like, I mean, even just understanding how we use the internet, like they still view, for instance, Twitter or Instagram as a promotional platform. They don't understand what it's like to like live online, I guess. It's like, oh yeah, Twitter. Okay. Yeah. So you go on there and you share your link when you wrote an article. It's like, no, this is like everything. Like the internet it's a manifestation of our social lives, of our identity. It's so intertwined with everything and like communication, and there's just not an understanding. And they certainly don't take broadly. I think the media does not recognize this shift towards like individual like influencers and brands and stuff. It's still so dismissed. I was thinking about when I covered the streamers on the Capitol riot or whatever, the insurrection, and I wrote about all these D-Live streamers that were monetizing, and then the merch that was being sold. A bunch of those people, like influencers, were selling merch based on that and whatever. And just these monetization schemes, it's like, this is how we've seen streamers and influencers monetize for years and years and years. Then here's how it can be applied in this like political event. It's like, I mean, obviously my editor is a tech editor, she gets it, but like, I think a lot of people don't realize that, like, just they think of like, oh, Taylor's Beat, it's just talking about like, oh, famous TikTokers, whatever. And it's like, I love your work because I feel like your work always shows like the dark evolution of like what I love a lot. Like a lot of the stuff I cover, like what it's going to become. And
well, I feel like there is you are generally, I would say, an optimist, but there are recurrent themes of like just deranged narcissism of like some corrupt product of social media, or greed, or all of the like unexpected, bizarre things that platforms create in society. And I think generally this is like indicative of the millennial experience, that we didn't think of technology as being political in any way. And then we just introduced these tools. Like we basically did city planning. Like we built these, a group of like insane libertarians in Silicon Valley did urban planning in the digital equivalent of it. And then they built all of these intersections where like people would cause conflict and terrible outcomes would happen. And now years later, we're like, I guess like this was ideological the whole time. Like, and like we should have had a political lens onto this stuff all of the time.
Well, I think yes. And I think Trump's election is like what opened a lot of people's eyes to the different ways that the platforms can be manipulated. Like, I think a lot of, especially like liberals, were like, whoa, this came out of nowhere. Like, what? And how did this happen?
Whoops.
And I was at the Hilton that night when Trump won with, Trump, all the people, and that celebration. And it was so funny. I had been at the Javits Center previously because I was covering that night and everything, and left. And it was so interesting how at the Hilton, like so many people were there for content. Like there's this like, it was all those like horrible, like right-wing kind of influencer type people. But there was this like it felt like a movement and a content thing, like a content strategy. Whereas I just think it took, I mean, that's a good example of like how there can be these like ecosystems and movement on the internet that like a lot of like normie people were blind to for a long time. Obviously, like, people are less blind to it now. Also, misinformation and all that whole like beat was not taken seriously. And like, I mean, that was not even I remember joining The Atlantic and that was not even a beat. It was like media companies didn't really recognize covering the extremism and all that stuff.
It happened really quickly. Yeah, I've had a number of interactions with those people. I feel like
with who, the reporters or the influencers?
No. I mean, people who are doing research into counter messaging and de-radicalization and this type of stuff, and like this whole world of like basically how do you manage like discourse? How do you prevent really dangerous, like destructive ideas from circulating? Let me ask you this question, though. This is, I don't have this fully figured out, but I've written a few things that I think point in the right direction because I'm thinking of you describing all of these like conservative content producers that are there as part of the movement. And so we grew up in a period where there were basically no political organizations. Politics was over. There is no alternative. My feeling is that something is going to happen through social media where some of these groups that are basically online followings, that one of them is going to become a real world force. There's an example of this that I wrote about for The Guardian, a streamer by the name of Destiny on Twitch.
I know Destiny.
Who had his very interesting character. I'm not giving an endorsement of everything he does, but some of the things he does are very important. He had his following canvass during the Georgia Senate runoffs. And there were a few weekends where they were the largest game in town. Just quantitatively, the number of volunteers, the number of doors knocked, they were the biggest one. Absent like the regular infrastructure of the Democratic Party to mobilize people and knock on doors. That is not an enormous example, but I feel like it's an important indication of the things that could grow out of this. And I wonder if you're seeing anything similar to that in the level of, again, maybe making the full arc here back to this question of like conversion rates becoming the determining factor of online communities, that there's going to be dedicated influencer or content or online communities that can mobilize their following to achieve real world goals.
I think we're seeing that already all over the map. I mean, obviously with QAnon and the school boards, all of the, you know, how they've managed to sort of like infiltrate and encourage a lot of people to run for positions on school boards across the country. And that's like very much part of that social campaign is like mobilizing people. I mean, I think the right is just far more like adept at doing that stuff than the left for so many reasons, but
they had a big head start.
Yeah.
And also it's just easier for them.
But yeah. I mean, I think, but if you even look at like the anti-Trump stuff or like the stuff that was happening with TikTok or Gen Z for Change or whatever, that definitely like, it's definitely like, that's sort of the future of campaigning and mobilizing groups. Like I wrote about Adrian's Kickback. Adrian's Kickback was this 17-year-old's birthday party that went viral. Do you remember Project X? It's kind of like that, or like Ruby's quinceañera. There was all these like wave of like Facebook events, but it's different with TikTok because it was distributing it to the masses. But this thing blew up within a period of a week and there was thousands of people there. And then there was like sort of copycat parties, whatever. But I just thought like, wow, obviously this is for this like meme because it's like the 17-year-old's birthday, but there's something to the fact of like the reach that you can get on TikTok so fast, and the fact that so many people will show up somewhere based on something like in person so fast. I mean, it was kind of like that with the Area 51 like
I was just thinking about that too.
Like,
yeah.
But it's gotten so.
There's also a Josh versus Josh battle that I got tagged in a lot.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's been so many things. I think Adrian's Kickback was thousands of people and like 150 people got arrested. So it was obviously way bigger than those other ones. But I think like that shows TikTok's ability to kind of like reach and mobilize people. Obviously these are for funny like meme events now, but you can very easily see how the right message could get tons of people to show up at the Capitol or whatever, right? Like that's also totally a manifestation of internet movements.
I felt like I had a clear vision of this before before the Capitol riots. Now it's a little bit more dicey, and obviously like the state is looking at this in a much more serious way. But I will say that I follow a lot of those characters as part of the research.
Yeah.
And they all knew that the banhammer was coming, and their streams the night of the 6th were an onboarding tutorial for Telegram, which is where you would find them
Yes.
afterwards. And now they're on another platform and another after that. And yeah, it kind of becomes this game of whack-a-mole that tributaries just form. Like you obstruct the stream, and then it just trickles and recollects later
Yes.
down the line. But
Yeah, Telegram is such a sleeper. Like,
yeah, do you spend time on it?
yeah, I'm in there. I'm in a lot of.
I have it in my Chromebook because a lot of it is banned from like iOS now. Like certain channels get banned.
I'm not in like political telegrams. I'm in like the Instagram growth hacking ones with like like random meme pages and stuff. Yeah, you got to get in there.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's selling followers to each other. I do one time. I know that there's been times where like I'll be getting a lot of like harassment or people spamming me or telling me to die or something, and sometimes it'll like I think one time somebody posted something about me and Milo's Telegram, or Milo had posted it. I guess. God. But it's just funny because it's like on Twitter, you see that happen. And sometimes I'll just be like, where is all of this coming? Like, why today? Like, I haven't even, and then it's often because something about me was posted in a Telegram group or something, it's like, it's very funny how you suddenly see that manifest like in your DM requests.
Yeah. You can trace it back to like, and they've done this also too, like the coordinated harassment techniques. Yeah, that's kind of what he's known for.
I don't even care about those people. It's just the dumbest.
He doesn't seem like he's doing well either with the recent antics.
Now.
That's.
I mean, it's sad.
What a rebrand.
Yeah, but it's just like funny where you'll just be like, "What? Like where is this?" Just kind of out of the blue. But I think that's just Telegram. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the reach is like way, way smaller on those things also. So I feel like generally the period that we're in, there's like it's really taken the wind out of the sails of a lot of those content producers.
Yeah.
And so as their communities dwindle, their ability to do that targeted harassment is going to hopefully decline.
Yeah, there's such an awareness of it too. Like I actually was thinking about this, my own, just personally, because I've dealt with a lot of harassment from wackos on the internet. And like a year and a half ago, like Josh, I was having such a hard time dealing with it. Yeah. Like I was like, these people were like, it was feeling really overwhelming and invasive. And I was like having like a really, really hard time with it. It was like really affecting me mentally. And I think part of that is because like people didn't understand. Like I would try to explain it to like my bosses. They absolutely did not understand it. And I felt like I was a crazy person where I was like, this is happening. Look at what's happening. Look at what they're doing to my family or my friends. Like, please. Like, and I really think even a year and a half later, like there's so much more understanding of it, at least from even peers. And like some of these people just recognize that this is their shtick. Like, I just think there's been, I mean, because I remember I had friends that dealt with a lot of that stuff in Gamergate, and that was similarly like they felt like that people didn't get it. And now I just think people get it to a level, and that's actually helpful. Like when I have another, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, I had tons of people coming at me and all this stuff. And I was just like, like, I don't care. Like, it's just, I don't know, like there's an acknowledgement, and I think my employer understands better. And so that makes me happier in the sense that I think there's more people start to understand how the internet works. And it's not like you must have done something,
Yeah. You get used to it. You learn how to manage it, but it's not something that you can ask of your family. Also,
no, and certain things. I mean, some of the stuff that's happened to me that I've had to get the police involved with and stuff. It's been very, very bad. But the mean DMs and all that shit, like, just doesn't.
At a certain point, that's like, yeah. I mean,
maybe you just become numb to it too. But it helps to have an awareness, right? It helps for people. Like, this is my frustration with media companies. It's like this idea, like you have to, if people are shaping a narrative about you, like you have to kind of call out what these bad actors are doing. You have to be like, look, this is a harassment campaign. They're harassing journalists because they want to, dismantle faith in the media because the media is holding them to account. It's like explaining it to people that have no media literacy and just kind of see stuff and believe it. And in that sense, I do think that the Zoomer kids are more understanding or like understand that stuff better.
Of the mechanics of social media.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, sometimes they weaponize it themselves, but at least there's an understanding.
Well, sometimes they know because they've done it or they know someone who's done it. Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah, the swarm mechanics are,
and the narrative driving. It's all about spinning a narrative about something, and is your narrative the one winning, right? And or is this stories that you're telling, are those the ones that are resonating online?
That's kind of I mean, this is very zoomed out, but I feel like the last few years, like I've been doing these interviews, I've had conversations with people where we get like very, very in the weeds about their belief systems and like how they understand the world. And it starts from these like 600 pixel JPEG silly memes. But when you get down to like the core of someone's belief systems of like how they really understand or how they think that the world works, it's all built on these like tiny little stories of something that like their dad said to them on vacation once. And it's like, no one's done the reading. Like everyone is just this amalgamation of tiny little building blocks of basically memes, like mimetic phrases, tiny stories. And it's been kind of shocking to some degree. It's like, I feel like that is part of my faith that has been shaken in institutions and everything, is just realizing like how many people I've talked to who are ostensibly at the top of this thing, who are making, I don't want to say mistakes, but are interpreting the world in a way that seems very formally similar to the young radicalized meme posters that I talk to. And some of them, their jobs are to set these narratives and to tell society's stories. And they're like, yeah, my belief system is built off of this like one experience that, my dad talked to me when we were on the beach that day. And that's like the thing. And it's like,
or I had one negative interaction on Twitter and now I hate SJWs or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's very humbling. It's very humbling. Yeah. Okay. So, Taylor, thank you so much for coming by. And your book is coming out. Let me read the title of the book. How about that? Extremely Online, Gen Z, The Rise of Influencers and the Creation of a New American Dream.
Yeah, it's gonna be out when I finish it.
Oh, okay.
It's due at the end of the year, the draft. So it'll probably be like later next year or the year after. Book timelines are crazy long. It's
I
kind
realize.
of insane.
Yeah. And in the meantime, where can people find your work?
Follow me. I'm just at Taylor Lorenz on Instagram. I have taylorlorenz.substack.com. I will send my Substack at some point soon. And everywhere on Twitter and at TikTok, anything. I'm just Taylor Lorenz pretty much everywhere.
Great.
So
Cool. Thanks so much. More again soon.
Thanks for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks, Taylor.